This was an often used call and response affirmation which I encountered for the first time in Lusaka. It was far from my only occasion of first encounter as one of many first-time ACC attendees that year, but it's really stuck with me. Another first was being exhorted during the opening festival Eucharist for 5,000 people at Lusaka Cathedral to shake my body in praise of the Lord. For the record, I was happy to oblige. It occurs to me I perhaps should say a little bit about what ACC actually is, because to my somewhat shame, I'd have to say, prior to the invitation to become the representative, I didn't even know of its existence, let alone what it did. The Anglican Consultative Council is one of the 4 instruments of communion of the Anglican Communion, along with the Primates meeting that the Primus has just mentioned, the Lambeth Conference, and the Archbishop of Canterbury. It meets every 3 to 4 years, and every one of the 38 provinces of the Anglican Communion is entitled to send delegates, either 1 up to 3, dependent on the size of the province. It's the one instrument of communion that has lay representation, and the emphasis is supposed to be on that, although it's fair to say in practice that's not quite how it necessarily works out. It is not the synod of the Anglican Communion, it is consultative, so its discussions are influential, as are its decisions, but they are not binding. The invitation to be the Scottish Episcopal Church's representative to ACC came completely out of the blue. I was very honoured by the invitation, but as a gay man, the prospect of visiting a country that maintains criminal sanctions against homosexuality did give me some pause for thought. Similarly, engaging in a church council meeting in the immediate aftermath of the Primates meeting, which the Primus has just told about, against the backdrop of the decision taken in relation to the Episcopal Church, and in relation to an issue which could not be more personal in its resonance, was also something I had to think about. And even if those personal dynamics had not been there, given the way that January's Primates meeting had been reported and the ACC meeting was being anticipated, I had real concerns that I could be taking a front row seat at the breakup of the Anglican Communion. So there was lots of apprehension in advance. But my goodness, am I glad that I went. About 2/3 the way through ACC, I was chatting with one of my fellow first-timers, and he said to me, "How are you finding it?" Put on the spot, I paused, and my answer was bewildering, frustrating, and inspiring. That remains my considered assessment, although I'm glad to say that as time passes, it's the inspiration that grows. The bewilderment and frustration was connected in some way to the management of the Diet of Business. We covered a huge amount of ground. The work of the Anglican Communion Office, important developments in ecumenical dialogues, discussions around human migration, which I would say was the major issue delegates brought with them to the meeting, violence, particularly gender-based, climate change, evangelism, discipleship, the role of young people in the communion, all featured significantly in our discussions. And the list of resolutions that resulted from those discussions are available in the additional papers that you have. Rather than concentrate on the detail of the business, though, I want to focus on the quality of meeting, because for me, that's where the inspiration lay. Firstly, there was the fellowship. And I am so grateful for the many instances of personal encounter and cultural exchange that I experienced. some of which I might have predicted in advance, but some of which I absolutely did not. And whilst we missed those who did not come, of course we did. You would be forgiven, given the way some of this has been reported, for not realizing that 34 out of the 38 provinces were represented. And I felt amongst those there that there was little desire to rake over past arguments or rub salt into old wounds, but far more a sense, whilst noting what had gone before, of a genuine desire to find commonalities, focus on the things we held in common, in short, to be in communion. Secondly, I was totally unprepared for discovering what a hugely important force for positive change in so many respects the Anglican Communion is across the world. I risk a generalization here, but my perception of Anglicanism in the UK is largely one of diffidence, at times almost apology. So the sense of the communion's very real power and influence came as a big and inspiring surprise. Perhaps that resonated more in Africa than it might have elsewhere. But when the worldwide Anglican Church talks about gender justice, about peace and reconciliation, about climate change, people listen. And for all of my personal frustrations, and at times anger and hurt, about the way the Anglican Communion is with issues of human sexuality, when the Archbishop of Canterbury stands up and restates the opposition of the Communion's primates to criminal sanctions for homosexuality in a country which maintains such sanctions, that matters. The perception of the Anglican Communion as an agent of progress and a courageous speaker of truth to power, and its effectiveness in doing so, came as a big and inspiring surprise. Thirdly, and on a much more personal level, I hadn't expected the profound sense of spiritual renewal I experienced at ACC. I have been a chorister since I was 7. That may explain an awful lot. But whilst never unconscious of the privilege that affords me, I sometimes feel that I miss the opportunity for simple devotion. Caught up too much in ensuring I got the right chant lined up with the right psalm, or worrying about that passage in the anthem which I never managed to get right to practice on Thursday. ACC provided that opportunity simply to listen to the different voices, their different emphases and inflections, their different languages, to participate and engage deeply with worship. And it's worth noting that in a province that does not yet ordain women, during ACC, 2 of the daily cathedral Eucharists were celebrated by women. It's also worth noting that on the second Sunday of ACC, when we all attended different churches in the Greater Lusaka area, at least 3 of the congregations heard sermons preached by senior ordained women priests in the Anglican Communion. And it was on that Sunday, at our second 4.5-hour long Eucharist, at Calendar Square Parish Church, that a sermon by Rose Hudson Wilkin, combined with the ebullient joy and passion of African worship, combined to create what is simply one of the deepest and most profound spiritual experiences of my life, and it's resonating in me still. So what do I think is the legacy of ACC 16? Well, first, I have a strong sense that despite any flaws in process or frustrations of mine, post-ACC, the Anglican Communion is in a better and stronger place than before. Secondly, I feel ACC has posed me a question. I'm not entirely sure yet what that is, but I am sure that part of that response to it is finding better ways of linking you and the Scottish Episcopal Church to that bigger international picture and communicating that sense of the vital worldwide movement of which we are a part. However challenging maintaining that relationship may prove, whatever consequences may ensue, and however it may test our hearts. And finally, thanks to my experience at ACC, I stand certain that however pleasing or otherwise in his eyes our response to his call may be, God is good all the time.